This is Reading Research Quarterly's Skype interview series. I'm Amanda Goodwin, and I'm one of the editors of Reading Research Quarterly. And we have today one of our fantastic Reading Research Quarterly authors, Dr. Perla Gamez. Welcome, Dr. Gamez.
Hi, thank you for the invitation.
Fantastic. Well, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came about this research?
Well, so my interest in language development in English language learners started when I was a kindergarten teacher in a bilingual program serving Spanish-speaking English language learners. And when I got into the classroom, I quickly realized that I had a lot more questions than answers about my students' learning, which naturally led me back to graduate school to try to answer these pressing questions that I had about how my students learn both English and Spanish. And well, one of the things that I saw when I was in the classroom was that there was a range of skills among the English learners in my classroom in both English and Spanish. There was wide variability in the English and Spanish skills that they entered and left my classroom with. And well, at that time, many people were interested in asking questions about how much English versus Spanish would be most beneficial for language learning. And I became more interested in asking not only about how much language they should be exposed to, but what type of language would enable their learning. And again, not only in English, but also in their native language. In this case, it was Spanish.
Very cool. So both languages and what type of language they were using, what the content was.
Right.
So can you tell us the name of your study and what their study found?
Yeah, so the name of our study is Shared Book Reading and English Learners Narrative Production and Comprehension. And this is a study that I conducted with my undergraduate student here at Loyola University Chicago and my graduate student. And well, what we did is we went into kindergarten classrooms, specifically Spanish-English bilingual classrooms, and we videotaped shared book reading sessions in Spanish. So most of the instruction in these classrooms was in Spanish. And shared book reading, this is an instructional context in which the teacher reads a book aloud to her students, and she actively engages them in text. So for example, through discussion about the story. And we were able to look at two widely recommended and yet still understudied strategies for promoting young English language learners' oral language skills, specifically their narrative skills. We looked at the type of language that kindergarten teachers use during shared book reading. In this case, we weren't interested in the words that were printed on the page. Instead, we were interested in the talk around the text, which is referred to as extra-textual talk. So this would include things like labeling or describing story nouns and story actions, so for example, verbs. And then we also looked at the behaviors that she used to support the students' comprehension of vocabulary and sentences in the book. So in this case, we were looking at teachers' gestures, specifically their hand movements that reinforce speech. So for example, when a teacher says raining, while she's making a hand movement like this, where she's wiggling her fingers in a downward motion. We also then came in at the beginning of the school year and then at the end of the school year to assess the children's narrative production and comprehension skills in Spanish. We had them watch a 1-minute video, a nonverbal cartoon about a mouse and his friends, and then we asked them to retell the story. We wanted to measure their production skills, and we also asked them several comprehension questions. And what we found was that teachers' extra-textual talk was related to children's storytelling, that is their production skills, while their tendency to gesture in order to reinforce that speech was related to the children's comprehension skills and their increased comprehension of the story by the end of the school year.
So that's super interesting. So we don't just need to read a text from start to end, right? We're going to read, but we're then going to add in additional definitions or questions or connections. So, the character may be running and I may say they're running so fast. So extra textual talk matters. But then you also found that the gestures that the teachers were doing really helped them build those comprehension skills.
Right. And so here we're really looking at the gestures that reinforce speech. So we were looking at those that matched the speech that the teacher was already providing for her students. So if a student didn't know, for example, what raining is, then we assume that a gesture like this would give them some access to the definition or what that word is.
Or even maybe the nuance of that word. So maybe they know what raining is, but they don't know that drizzling is or pouring is, right? So helping us get that level of nuance.
Right.
So what does your study have to say for teachers?
Well, so the interesting thing about this study, I think, is that we relied on naturalistic observation techniques. That is, we didn't go in to tell teachers what to say or what to read. We just asked them to do what they would do on a typical day. And so these are things that teachers are already doing in the classroom. So I would tell teachers to just continue immersing their children in these language-rich discussions in order to create these high-quality language environments for their students.
Well, that's so important. I love both those pieces. Like, you're doing a great job. So keep doing what you're doing. And then also parts of what you're doing are so meaningful. That language rich piece, right? That extra textual talk and those gestures to support building those lexical representations and comprehension.
Exactly.
Very cool. So what would you have to say to principals and policymakers regarding the findings of your study?
Well, so I think that there's a real need for intentional policy efforts to target augmenting and elevating the language of the classroom. We know that high-level conversations are critical for high-quality instruction and students' optimal learning. So there's a real need to build these conversational skills into the curriculum and also to provide professional development to teachers on how to engage students in conversation.
So space, but also professional development to figure out how to do that in effective ways. So for example, how to have gestures that help us determine the difference between drizzling and pouring rain.
Right.
Very cool. And that leads me to my next question. As parents, what can we do based off of the findings of your study?
There is a lot of evidence that suggests that reading at home is a great way to get these conversations going. And in fact, the language in the books is more sophisticated and more complex than in spontaneous speech. And we know that it's that complexity and that sophisticated language that children are going to be expected to know in order to comprehend their texts and to engage in conversations in the classroom. And so getting parents to talk more, to create these language-rich home environments and to use books as a way to get these conversations started.
So that seems like really important things, because it may be that it's not just reading books, but it's also reading books in these language-rich ways. So as a parent, for example, what I've taken from reading your study is that when I'm reading, I should also have extra textual talk, right? I'm not just going to read from the beginning to the end. I think as a parent, that's an important piece for me. And the other thing that I took away that was really helpful was gestures. I never thought about that, to be honest, as a parent reading. I never thought about, making the gestures to help my child build both comprehension and lexical representation. So, I'm going to be changing the way that I read with my kids. And so for me, it's quantity. We definitely read every night, but the way that we read, I think, is really important as well.
Right. And I think a lot of the time, parents who are working, who have a lot going on, it's easy to sit down and read with the child. And most of the time we just want to get through the book, but we know that it really is those conversations that are happening around the book that are going to be important for the child. So even if you don't get through the entire story, defining words or and making connections to something that happened during the school day or maybe some museum or zoo trip you took or something like that.
It sounds really powerful. So what's next?
So thus far, we've been able to look at the teacher talk in these classrooms. And one of the things that we've been really interested in looking at more recently, is that bidirectional relationship between the teacher and the child talk. And in the studies that we have ongoing in our lab right now, we've been able to capitalize on new methodology to be able to record speech samples, not only from the teacher, but also from the student. And we're in classrooms, in kindergarten classrooms, we're in sixth grade classrooms, where now we're looking not only at what the teacher's saying, but also at what the child is saying. We're also in bilingual homes with families who report speaking both English and Spanish. And these are with children at about the age of 18 months, where we're now also looking at not only the gestures that the adults are using, but also the gestures that the children are using, to be able to see if those gestures that children use might give us a window into what children are or know at these early stages of language learning.
That's fascinating. Well, I can't wait to hear what goes on with all those levels from 18 months all the way to sixth grade classrooms. I really think this idea of how language, and in particular book reading, can support language is important and can help us move forward in supporting kids and their literacy development. Right. So some things that I'm thinking about as I'm processing your article, tell me if I'm right on this one. Okay. So big takeaways is that teachers are doing great things already.
Right.
And so we need to keep doing those great things. And those great things mean creating a language-rich environment. And part of the language-rich environment involves book reading, and it also involves book reading via extra textual talk and gestures so that we can really help give kids lots and lots and lots of different information about the words and the ideas that they're interacting with.
Right. And I think that the second piece is also to not forget that these are not happening in a vacuum, that teachers are having conversations with their students. So it's also important to engage the students in some talk. So it's not just about the teacher bombarding them with all of this information, but also to give them the space and the opportunities for the students to also be engaging in high quality talk.
That's fascinating. And that's such an important piece. So it's not just the teacher, right? It's providing the space for the kids to interact, providing the space for the kids to use their language.
Right.
In both languages, both English and Spanish, which I think is a really important piece of your work and sets your work apart. Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for being with us. I really appreciate it. It's definitely going to change the way that I interact with my kids. And so I am grateful.
Well, thank you for having me. It was great to talk with you.
Fantastic. And if you want to read more of Dr. Gamez's article, you can find it on the Reading Research Quarterly's webpage. Can you tell us the title of your article one more time?
Yes. So the title is Shared Book Reading and English Learners' Narrative Production and Comprehension.
What do you want the big takeaway message for your study to be in terms of the research to practice?
So that I think that what we want to do is augment and elevate the language of the classroom so that we can create these language-rich classroom environments for children, because we know that they're critical for students' learning.
That's perfect. And that's exactly the takeaway that I'm going to take away. So thank you so much.